There's a big focus, a big concern ahead of the elections next year. 1st of May, International Workers' Day. Every year we ask this question, and I often wonder, do we actually get anything done as far as unions and workers are concerned? So workers continue to voice their unhappiness with inequality, low salaries and general working conditions. Let's bring into the conversation SAFTU General Secretary, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi, making time for us this morning. Do we have anything to celebrate? Mr. Vavi, good morning.
Well, there's one major victory we scored through NUMSA in the run-up to this May Day. A constitutional court made a historic ruling that the employers will no longer be allowed to lock out workers and at the same time employ scab labor to replace them whilst they are on a strike. And it's historic because most of the strikes have been weakened precisely because the employer can initiate or respond through a lockout, but still employ a replacement labor to force workers to come back one by one on their knees. That's now over, and that's very historic. That's something we must celebrate as we celebrate the 137th anniversary of the first May Day to be celebrated way back in the 1881 period. Now, the rest of the other issues are not looking good, Gareth. You're so correct. And look, the principal problem in South Africa is that under the capitalist system, you have to only rely on working to earn an income. And when you have 42% of your overall society in unemployment, when you have 50% of your black people in unemployment, when up to 51% of black women in unemployment and 70% of those between the age of 15 and 24 unemployed, then we have a major crisis because that makes us the most industrialized country with such levels of unemployment. We hold position number one. We hold position number one in the whole world when it comes to youth unemployment. When those factors are combined, they mean that 30 million South Africans live below the upper bound poverty line of just 1,417, and that 80% of the population only owns 20% of the country's wealth, and whereas only 1% of the population owns 45% of the wealth. Now, we are the most unequal society in the world. We still live in a crisis of a dysfunctional capitalist system, neoliberalism and austerity that are making things much more worse for workers in South Africa. But corruption is still the worst. We're holding the position number one when it comes to corporate cooperation.
And Mr. Vavi, many people look towards government as the one to level the blame at, to the point, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, we could discuss it in depth, I'm sure, as we get close to elections, SACP even considering leaving the tripartite alliance. The sense I get is they've had enough of the ANC. They're saying you're not actually fighting for workers' rights anymore. We could probably do a better job as a standalone party in next year's elections. I mean, that's the point where we are now when it comes to workers' rights being violated in our country.
God, how many times have we heard that? Every time there's election around the corner, the SACP plays the same card. We are leaving. And they get some small sweets, and that's the last thing we'll ever
So you don't think they'll do it this time round, Mr. Vavi? You don't think they'll do it this time round? It's a blind threat. Is that what you're saying?
No, they won't. They won't. The problem that we must understand is that we have lost the innocence of the politics, and we have lost the superiority of our ideology to patronage, to the right to eat a little, as indicated in that interview you guys had with the former CEO, who, of course, is another story altogether, because we now know that he was working with the underworld of the spies taken from the apartheid era. But there will be no SSCP that will leave the ANC because there is just too much at stake for them at the personal level, because the personal fortunes of leaders makes them to want to to stay even in a relationship that is happening at the expense of their so-called ideology of socialism, which they do not practice, and or even at the expense of their own individual members. The SSCP will not leave the ANC because it is the only way that they can also join in the feeding trough and enjoy the perks that come with the cabinet ministers, post, the premierships, the MECs, the mayors, and all of that. Forget about the SSCP. What the challenge workers are facing at this moment is to unite with the genuine SSCP members, genuine COSATU, SAFTU, all of the trade unions, all of the civil society, all of the working class formations, to launch a new struggle in South Africa against the fact that our country is inside a house-written failed state. Failed, if you look at, for example, just the issue of violence that is afflicting the working class communities, that is a major, major challenge as we go forward.
Mr. Vavi, let me ask you about this very damaged and destroyed house that you're talking about, because you mentioned just about every trade union. I'll leave this as a last question to you, because you got me thinking about this. So if you've just mentioned all those unions, including your own SAFTU, of course, could we see some kind of union alliance under one banner ahead of the 2024 elections, or is it just too soon to think of something like that?
The trade union movement itself is damaged by everything else that is happening in society. Look, death, corruption is yet inside the house of the trade union. Individualism, self-centeredness, lack of internal democracy, the death of one of the most celebrated values of worker struggle is worker control. It is dying because all of what you see happening in the capitalist society is permeating into the trade unions, even religious organizations, NGOs, and everybody else, not left alone. So that's the biggest crisis. We're celebrating 50 years of 1973 Durban strikes today and crying over how, over a period of time, we have allowed a decay of the most celebrated values of the trade union movement. We've got to strengthen the union movement. We've got to unite it, and we've got to unite it with the working class formations. That's the only hope that we have for South Africa. If we cannot get it right there, forget it. We're going to see more coalitions of unprincipled political parties who are doing everything under service delivery team when they're actually meaning that they are doing it for their own pets to get into the feeding trap.
Mr. Vavi, thank you very much indeed, as always, speaking to us on what is a very important day for workers, workers' rights, workers' demands. This is the 1st of May, Workers' Day, May Day, whichever way you'd like to refer to it. It's certainly our focus for today on the very first day of the month as well. Where are workers taking our country? Do they have the right tools in place to have the right say? Well, there's this talk, as we've just been hearing from Mr. Vavi, that it's about time for the workers' unions to rethink how things are done, because some 29 years later, not much is happening. My thanks to Zwelinzima Vavi, SAFTU General Secretary. It will be our focus throughout the day here on eNCA.